Hello everybody, and welcome to our next video in our Learn to Play Chess series. Today, what we're going to be talking about is the relative piece value. So as you're playing a game, how can you figure out how well you're doing? Are you ahead of your opponent? Are you behind your opponent? Are you winning, losing? Well, we're going to help you figure that out a little bit today with a handy method to let you know how strong the pieces roughly are in relation to each other. Now, former world champion Garry Kasparov, he once described chess as existing in three different aspects. One of those aspects is tempo, or time. Another one is position, based off of where the pieces are and what they're doing. And the third aspect is material. What we're learning today is addressing material. How do we value our pieces? How much worth should we assign them? Of course, depending on what's going on in the game, sometimes that changes a little bit, but we need a baseline, something to work off of to begin with, and that's what we're going to go over today. Now, the first thing to know is that the pawn is the most common piece on the board. So if we're going to base units for figuring out how strong our pieces are, we're going to go ahead and use the most common one we have, the pawn, and we're going to say that a pawn is worth 1. So if we were to count points in chess, which ultimately doesn't matter, our goal is to checkmate the opponent's king, but if we were keeping score, if we were counting points, a pawn would be worth 1 point. So how strong are those other pieces? Well, let's take a look here. The bishop and the knight are both assigned relatively the same piece value. They're what we call our minor pieces. The reason we call them minor pieces is that neither the bishop or the knight, when paired alone with the king, will be able to give checkmate. It's going to take at least 2 of them to give a checkmate, a bishop and a knight, or 2 bishops, but not a knight or a bishop by itself. Both pieces on their own are going to be worth roughly 3 pawns. So we've got our bishop and our knight, and we can count it over here, 1, 2, 3 pawns. That's the rough value of either one of these 2 pieces. Next one we're going to look at is the rook. The rook is the first of what we would call our major pieces, that being the 2 rooks and the queen. Why are they major pieces, you might ask? Well, what we just said before, if all you have is a rook and a king, you can still give checkmate to a lone opponent's king. The rook and king can give checkmate against the sole king, so the rook is a major piece. Roughly how many pawns is the rook worth? Well, let's count them up over here. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pawns is roughly the value of 1 rook. So 3 for the bishop, 3 for the knight, 5 for the rook. All right, well, how about our lady, the queen? How strong is she in relation to the rest of our pieces? Well, you can see we've got a whole slew of pawns over here. We can total those guys up. We've got a 3 by 3 square. That's going to make 7, 8, 9 pawns here that we have the value of a queen. Not only is the queen the strongest of any of our pieces, and the easiest one to give checkmate with when we have just the king and the queen, but also you'll note that any of these 2 pieces, if you add a knight to a rook, it's still only 8 pawns, so the queen is still considered to be stronger than a minor piece paired with the rook. Either a bishop and rook or a knight and rook still are not as strong together as the queen. 2 rooks, however, would make 10 pawns. 2 rooks are considered to be slightly stronger than the queen. So although she is strong, she's not the strongest possible combination on the board. And of course you could have 3 minor pieces, 2 knights and a bishop, or 2 bishops and a knight, and that would be roughly equivalent to the strength of the queen. That's our relative piece values here. That gives you some idea for how to keep track of material as we go through the game. In some of our other videos, we'll start addressing those other elements that Garry Kasparov mentioned. We'll talk about tempo, we'll talk about how to get you better positions, but now you have some idea of what material is, how to keep track of where you are in the game. If you have any questions, be sure to leave them in the comments below, and I hope that you go out there and snag all that winning material that you need to beat up on your opponents.